So another thing to remember about Frankenstein is that if we use it as our example of romanticism, it's also an example of what we call the Gothic novel. And Gothic novels are a particular subset of romantic literature. So they have a lot of the same features, the use of intense emotion, the depiction of nature is a really powerful and destructive force, using weather and atmosphere to reflect mood. You'll see that happen to Victor a lot. But the other thing that's different about Gothic novels is that they use terror and ghosts and creepy stuff, ghosts and monsters and things like that to evoke terror and horror. So you'll often see really supernatural elements going on in Gothic novels. Frankenstein obviously is one of them, but the works of Edgar Allan Poe are another example, so that's a thing to keep in mind. I want to tell you a little bit about Mary Shelley and who she is, because it's actually really important to the way that the novel is constructed. So she is the daughter of a couple of really famous parents. Her mother is the prominent feminist Mary Wollstonecraft. Her father is a political theorist named William Godwin, and they're like intellectual superstars of the time. So she's born into kind of, I mean, it's not like she's got paparazzi following her around or anything, but she's born into kind of a prominent family. She loses her mother really fast, though, just a few days after she's born. Remember, Rousseau had the same thing happen to him. And because she's a child and children are kind of handfuls, I guess, her father decides to marry someone else to have some help to raise her. But Mary doesn't get along with her stepmom at all, and her father eventually sends little Mary off to live with her relatives in Scotland. And as you can imagine, that's really horrible for a kid, right? She's rejected from her parents. She feels isolated because she's been sent away, and you can actually see that really clearly in Frankenstein. So there's this great scene where the monster confronts his creator and says, you know, you're my creator, but you detest me. I'm your creature. You're bound to me by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. I ought to be thy Adam, but instead I am your fallen angel. And you've driven me from joy, and I haven't done anything wrong. So this kind of scene is really evocative of the feeling of isolation and rejection that Mary experiences from her parents. So going back to that for a second, there's another important theme going on here, and it's the biblical allusion, right? So we kind of saw this with Rousseau, where he constructs in part 2 of the discourse this retelling of the Genesis story. The same thing is going on in Frankenstein, right? Except that Mary Shelley is not using the Genesis story from the Hebrew scriptures. She's using Milton's version from Paradise Lost. Now, Paradise Lost is this really cool poetic retelling of the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible, but the difference in Paradise Lost is that Satan is present, right? Remember, there's a serpent in the Hebrew scriptures that doesn't represent Satan because the Hebrews don't have a concept of Satan. But for Milton, he depicts Satan as the chief angel of heaven who's rebelled against God, is cast into hell, and so he tempts Adam and Eve in order to avenge himself. This is the story that Shelley is using as inspiration for her retelling of Genesis. So you'll see the creature confront his creator near the end of chapter 10. That's where he compares himself to Adam, right? You are God and you created me, but I'm also like Satan, right? Because I've been, I'm your fallen angel. You've rejected me. So what you'll see unfold through chapters 11 through about 16 of Frankenstein is this really cool expanded allusion to Paradise Lost. So you'll see parallels between God and Satan in the poem and Frankenstein and his creature in the novel kind of unfold. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so back to Shelley's life. She goes back to England when she's 15 and she falls in love. She meets the person she will eventually marry, who is actually a student of her father's. He's 21 years old. He's a political radical. His name is Percy Bysshe Shelley. And there's something really scandalous about this, right? Because Shelley actually is already married. He has 2 kids. He has several kids. I don't remember. But he's married. He has a couple of kids. And they have an affair, right? So this is a huge scandal, remember, because Mary Shelley's father, or Mary Godwin's father is really famous, right? So there's this huge scandal, and Mary's father doesn't approve. So again, she sort of experiences that rejection. And then something really wild happens, right? This sounds like it's straight out of Jerry Springer, but Mary and Percy decide to elope, and Percy's wife, Harriet, commits suicide, right? Because, I mean, what else are you gonna do? Your husband's run off with some other girl, and you've got kids to support, and it's Victorian England, so she commits suicide. And, you know, Mary and Percy are married, so what do? They take a honeymoon, and they bring her stepsister along. I'll explain that in a second. And I know that's really weird. And I will also say that there's evidence that shows that Mary and Percy tried to get Percy's kids, but they weren't allowed to have them. And Mary feels really awful about this. I know she's like the other woman and all of that, but she does feel really bad. So that's something you also have to consider when you're reading this, is the kind of tumultuous relationship she has. Okay, so they go on a honeymoon and they bring her stepsister along, and that's only important because of who her stepsister's boyfriend is. Her stepsister's boyfriend is this guy named Lord Byron, and he's this super famous poet. So if Mary didn't have paparazzi following her around before, she basically has them following her around now because of who she's traveling with. And so Mary and Percy and Mary's stepsister and Lord Byron go vacation together in Geneva. And why is that important? Because that's when Mary writes Frankenstein. Because they're vacationing in Switzerland and the weather is bad. So they can't go out and do all the fun things they wanted to do. And so Lord Byron says, hey, we're stuck inside. Why don't we challenge each other to write the scariest story of all time? So, you know, Percy and Mary and Lord Byron each decide that they're going to you know, compete against each other to write a really chilling ghost story. And Mary, who's 17, by the way, when she finishes this, is the only person who writes a story, and she writes Frankenstein, right? So this is a huge deal. A little bit more context about Frankenstein. First thing to understand is that the subtitle of the novel is Frankenstein the Modern Prometheus, right? And that's an allusion to the Prometheus myth. Remember, if you've taken Western Civ 1 or if you've taken Greek mythology or something, you might have heard about the story of Prometheus, who was a titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. He's punished, right? Because he's not allowed to do this, and his punishment is really severe, right? He gets tied to a rock, and an eagle shows up every day, pecks out his liver, and it regenerates overnight, and it's, you know, it happens again and again every day for the rest of eternity. We can imagine he's still out there chained to a rock somewhere. So if you remember the story of Prometheus, the thing that you might remember about it is hubris. We'll talk more about hubris when we get to Antigone next week. That's Western Civ 1. So what you're supposed to understand about hubris is that it's this excessive pride that humans have, this presumption, or this arrogance toward the gods. Victor Frankenstein has this hubris too. I'll get to the golem in a second. Remember, because he thinks he's God. And so he tries to create life, and just like Prometheus, who steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans, he's overstepped his bounds, right? He's exhibited hubris, and he has, he's upset the balance of the universe, so he's punished really severely for it. So let me stop this one here, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the golem story, and then I'll clue you into some of the stuff you need to look out for when you're looking at Frankenstein.